This is the writing game. I'm Gregory Placi. Choice, decisions, options, pathways, variety, open worlds. All are words we use to describe player-driven experiences. Experiences that don't have much in the way of the very thing they claim to offer. Consequences. Once upon a time, something happened, and it was better than something not happening. The end. So said Dan Harmon, creator of Community and co-creator of Rick and Morty. It's a reductive view of what makes for a story, but it's an apt one, because if something doesn't change, then there is no story. Which, if you didn't see my previous episode, plot or story, is the basis for my argument, as it probably is in every episode. To tell a story, regardless of medium, is to tell of change and its consequences. But for that story to begin, we need a character to seek change. That doesn't have to be the protagonist. Often it's not. In most cases, especially for stories that follow Campbell's hero's journey, the antagonist sets things in motion. The protagonist, as a result, is quite passive in the beginning, being reactive rather than proactive. Think of any superhero. They may be on patrol keeping the city streets clean of crime, but that's only low-level efforts. It's the machinations of a supervillain that get them doing something more than stopping pickpockets and bank robbers. Games often have the same beginning. Call of Duty, Halo, The Witcher 3, and just about every other franchise starts the same way. Someone else does something bad, and we have to show them how they have now pissed off the wrong people, namely us, the player, or our avatar. Halo's a great example, because in the original game, we as a Master Chief are effectively in cryosleep. Lo and behold, the Covenant come along and make a mess of things, so we get woken up to set things right. We're reacting from the very beginning, in part because it's a start that could be argued as in media res, because the action and the story have effectively started before we, the player, come into it. The situation in the story as such keep us reacting for some time as we seek to escape the Pillar of Autumn. And it doesn't take long for the Master Chief to take charge. By the time we've left the Pillar of Autumn and landed on Halo, we've switched to an active driver of change. It's our decisions, our missions, determined by Keyes, Cortana, and the Master Chief, that set the game on a path the Covenant weren't prepared for. That change from reactive to active is necessary. It's a transition that not all games are capable of making. Call of Duty is notoriously bad in this regard, with the player character being led throughout most of the games, even if they are in a position of command. Sure, some games allow you to select which mission to take, but look at who leads in cutscenes. It's not the player character. Video games like to promise more than active participation. They strive to offer agency over not just a character, but the world the character inhabits. In short, they promise choice, and a result of that choice, consequence. But I don't think most offer any choice, especially a lot of the large AAA open world extravaganzas. There are exceptions, as there always are. The stories these games offer, and thus the characters to be played, don't provide choice. Game design, not story, is the culprit in this case. The writing of any game can sidestep this issue only so much. Cutscenes, whether in-engine or pre-rendered, give a character power that's not expressed elsewhere in a game. Think of Gears of War, and how it only took one shot to kill pretty much anyone during cutscenes, but during gameplay, everyone became a bullet sponge. Or for a more recent example, Destiny 2. The major NPCs can use their powers at will and accomplish feats a player can only dream of. Players don't get to down enemy ships with their light or withstand a massive missile barrage. Sure, they can whip out their golden gun and down some enemies faster than Wyatt Earp, but they won't be cracking wise. What players will be doing is using the same verbs again and again, and all those verbs, with the exception of those regarding movement, end with NPCs dead. Everything dies, especially in video games. Time and again, we kill, shoot, stab, hit, garrote, blow up, slice, dice, run over, drop, push, ignite, implode, eviscerate, eliminate, or otherwise harm other players or computer characters. Okay, okay, okay. Not every game has us killing things. Katamari Damacy is all about rolling stuff up. Firewatch is about exploring the world and talking. Rugby is about moving a ball in conjunction with your teammates and being awesome while you do so. Those games are actually about so much more, but much of my case in this episode revolves around the reduction of the verbs, aka choices, we have in those games to their simplest purpose. Being so reductive is necessary because of how different games are even within the same genre or series. Movement mechanics alone vary when all the player may be doing is asking the game to move their character or avatar forward. Co-op by Bennett Foddy, Grow Home by Ubisoft, or the aforementioned Firewatch by Camposanto are prime examples. In each case, the player is focusing on moving their character forward. To do so just doesn't take a different button press, but a series of thought. Co-op requires coordination. Grow Home needs planning, and Firewatch lets the player simply move. Yes, it's all by design, but it's also about the characters the games are asking the player to inhabit and the stories they're trying to tell through them. Now, we could readily analyze each of those games on an individual or comparative basis, but for the purpose of this episode, that doesn't help. Hence, the need to be reductive. Movement is about changing location regardless of how that occurs. The same is true for combat, because as much as games like Assassin's Creed Origins will say it offers a choice, face-to-face fights, stealth attacks, or ranged combat, the result of every encounter is a dead NPC. That choice is really nothing more than flavor. It's like ice cream. Regardless of whether it's chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry, you're still eating cold milk and sugar and getting the requisite energy from it. And you may argue that if face-to-face fights are ice cream, that makes stealth frozen yogurt and ranged combat sorbet. But you're still eating a cold, sugary treat that results in the same thing. Energy in the case of the treat, or a dead NPC in the case of the game verb. And those treats are delicious and they keep us coming back for more. But a meal they do not make. And we see that in Assassin's Creed Origins, because the story doesn't happen in the flavors of the combat presented to the player. It's in the cutscenes. The character of Bayek makes choices outside of the scope of the player that affect the game, Bayek's story, and ultimately what players experience. The only real choice presented players is whether or not to engage in the side quests because of the consequences of doing so. Namely, players will not explore more of the world, gain wicked loot, or stab a lot more people. Other open world games are just as limited in the consequences they present. Just Cause 3 lets you use a variety of weapons and tools that ultimately end in mass destruction. Horizon Zero Dawn falls into the same traps in terms of combat choices. Sure, there's flavor galore, but you're always eating ice cream. The Far Cry series, like all Ubisoft open world titles, with probably the exception of Watch Dogs, ends in absurd violence on a scale that, while enjoyable, borders on the perverse. And don't get me wrong, I'm planning on playing Far Cry 5 just like I've played every other Far Cry game out there, except for Primal. Was never interested in it. Writing for these games leaves little room for choice, because the protagonists are always going to have to revert to the verbs available to them in order to solve their problems and change the world. That's why time and again we see one of two things happen in game. There are cutscenes and or there's a supporting cast of characters. Assassin's Creed Origins, as mentioned before, gives the character Bayek a chance to express himself and do more than murder half of Egypt, but only in the cutscenes. And the cutscenes don't happen without a writer. Nor do supporting characters. Take Alex in Half-Life 2. Much of her role is to accomplish what the player cannot as Gordon Freeman. Alex's ability to express, explain, and interact with the world provide depth that a player's ability to only commit violence doesn't. Both of those have their places in games, but they do little to create a player-driven story or allow for a player-driven plot, because neither allows for choice. You can create a game with 1,000 verbs, but that's not going to guarantee a player has any choice or that there's a plot, because choice is consequence. A game offers a player choice if the outcome of a particular decision, a particular verb, is something that none of the other verbs ends in. The Witcher 3 and Watch Dogs 2 offer that very opportunity to players, all because of the Axis sign and hacking. Those two mechanics provide chances to avoid combat altogether. Not always, but that makes it interesting and the story more dynamic as a result. Non-combat mechanics, or verbs in a game, automatically create a greater variety of consequences. Those consequences, in turn, offer a deeper opportunity to explore a character in their world for both the game designers and writers. Finally, the ability to explore more solutions to a given problem allows the player true choice. Right now, you're maybe asking, what about immersive sims? Series like System Shock, Dishonored, Deus Ex, and Prey offer a lot of systems and ways to interact with the world. Sadly, more often than not, players have to resort to violence to resolve any situation. There may be hacking, stealth, and theft as ways of bypassing some scenarios, and that's great. But it's rare that violence can be avoided altogether to complete a game. Immersive sims aren't offering true choice, they're just presenting the appearance of choice by varying the flavor of interactions, by offering chocolate and vanilla and strawberry combat. My whole argument up to this point has been about being reductive in the consequences of a mechanic. There is one mechanic that we can't be reductive about, and that's dialogue. Dialogue choices can result in any consequence the writer so chooses. That's not to say they shouldn't make sense, but dialogue offers everything as a possibility. Insult someone, and combat can begin. Flirt with them, and your character can end up in bed. Beguile an NPC, and you can steal their most precious treasures. Or simply convince an enemy their methods are wrong, and you can turn them to be an ally. Mass Effect is one of the greatest examples of what's possible with dialogue. In the final battle, when Sovereign is attacking the Citadel and Saren is leading the assault on the Council, you can convince Saren to kill himself. The player can quite literally cut the combat in half by the very option to talk to the antagonists and show them the folly of their ways. Of course, this was tied into the Paragon and Renegade and skill systems, but the choice was present in dialogue, not in combat, not in stealth, not in crafting. Dialogue, or even story-based choices that aren't tied to a specific mechanic, offer more and avoid reductive descriptions because of their sheer possibility. And that possibility comes from the subtext within the writing. Not every game is going to allow for subtext. Generally, as a result of design, but sometimes because of the target audience. The latter happens a lot with games geared towards children. If a game tells a player of a pending consequence for a particular choice, then there's no subtext. Some players want this, some do not. Some game designers want this, some do not. It's all a matter of choice when it comes to developing a game. But Mass Effect again is an example where the creators walked this line, telling you if a particular dialogue option was Renegade or Paragon choice, but not exactly what would be said. The interactions possible during these conversations are also great examples, where a player knows potential outcomes, but not all the consequences. So you know you're making a renegade choice in Mass Effect 2 if you choose to pull the trigger while in the tower in pursuit of Thane, but you're not sure how the interrupt will play out. In this case, it's throwing an NPC out the window. Firewatch, as mentioned in the previous episode plot or story, is subtle. It never tells the player the outcome of any choice, be it walking in a particular direction or saying something to Delilah. More than that, there's subtext to what Henry and Delilah are saying, implications that may or may not be there and are only left up to the player to determine if they exist. Dialogue and the writing requires the characters that need to be developed and thought out are where real choice in video games are presented. It's in telling a story that recognizes not every situation can or should be solved by a single action. Because if there's a single course of action the protagonist uses to resolve every situation, then there's no character development. If there are no alternatives or drivers to entice him to choose another course of action, then there's no drama. Drama needs more than choice, it requires true consequence. All of it, though, requires storytelling, good storytelling. Because in the end, not all verbs in games are created equal. But more on drama in a future episode. As far as writing goes, you'll never be able to have dramatic turns, changes to characters, or other story developments that come from the choices the protagonist makes if the verbs available for that character to express themselves are so limited. Everything is going to be relegated to cutscenes or non-player characters. Or you'll have to take the Spec Ops the Line approach and code the game for different possibilities at certain points. The games that make use of verbs available in such a manner are few and far between. That's why ones like Spec Ops the Line stand out so well. Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light by 4A Games are another great example, where small interactions that aren't explicitly signposted affect the story, present choices, and result in consequences down the line. They're games where you don't have to kill everyone. Stealth and non-violence are viable options. Not all the time, and probably not at the right times from a philosophical point of view. For more on that, listen to the latest episode of Waypoint 101, where they discuss Metro 2033. But there are real choices in these games, both in and out of combat scenarios. It's never guaranteed you'll be able to accomplish such nuance in your own game, as the time, energy, and money it takes to produce them may be better allocated elsewhere, according to your game's director. For there to be real choice in a game, though, there has to be the option not to participate in the core loop, to not commit violence, to find an alternative solution. It's never just a question of how many guns a player has or the style in which they commit murder. That's just flavor. Thanks for taking part in this episode of The Writing Game. I'm Gregory Palaci. Everything I do can be found at onegamedad.com, and I can be reached there or on Twitter at onegamedad if you want to talk writing, games, this show, or even working together. The Writing Game is hosted by Third Culture Kids, which can be found at thirdculturekids.net, where the full transcript of this episode is available. Please be sure to like and subscribe or rate and review this show on whatever platform you find it. I'll see you on the next episode.